He thought kicking a pregnant black woman was an easy display of power. He didn't know his victim was a Marine intelligence officer trained to dismantle men far more dangerous than him. The scent of fresh paint and lavender filled the small room that was slowly becoming a nursery. Captain Eva Rostova, late of the United States Marine Corps, stood admiring her handiwork. At 35, after a decorated decade in military intelligence, she had traded encrypted communications and threat assessments for wallpaper samples and a quiet life in suburban Georgia. 7 months pregnant, her body, once conditioned for the rigors of deployment, was now dedicated to the singular mission of creating life. Her husband, David, a gentle high school history teacher, wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his hands on the gentle swell of her belly. "It's perfect, Ev," he whispered, kissing her temple. "He's going to love it." Eva smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that was still a novelty to her. "He'd better. This crib took me longer to assemble than a field radio." Peace was a foreign country she was slowly learning to inhabit. The hypervigilance, the instinct to analyze every person as a potential threat or asset, was finally beginning to recede, replaced by a softer focus. This quiet life with David was the objective she had fought for in dusty, forgotten corners of the world. It was a life she would protect with the same ferocity she had once reserved for national secrets. That afternoon, returning from a routine doctor's appointment, that peace was shattered. David was driving their modest sedan, and Eva was in the passenger seat, a hand resting protectively on her stomach, when the flashing blue and red lights filled their rear-view mirror. "Did I do something wrong?" David asked, his brow furrowed with confusion as he pulled over to the shoulder. "No, your signal was fine, you're not speeding," Eva said, her old training kicking in instantly. Her eyes flicked to the side mirror, assessing the approaching officer. White male, mid-40s, stocky build, a certain swagger in his step that spoke of an overinflated sense of authority. She noted his name tag, Maddox. Officer Travis Maddox arrived at David's window, his hand resting casually on his holstered weapon. "License and registration." His voice was flat, bored. As David complied, Maddox's gaze drifted past him to Eva. His eyes lingered for a moment, a flicker of something unpleasant, a mix of appraisal and dismissal, in his expression. He took the documents and walked back to his cruiser. "What was that about?" David murmured. "He's fishing," Eva said quietly. "He's running our names, looking for a reason to escalate. Just stay calm and polite." A few minutes later, Maddox returned, a new edge to his voice. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." "Officer, why?" David asked, still polite but firm. "I smell marijuana coming from your car," Maddox lied, the accusation a well-worn tool for justifying illegal searches. Eva's internal alarms blared. It was a textbook pretext. "Officer," she interjected, her voice calm but firm, making sure her hands were visible. "My husband and I are both educators. I am 7 months pregnant. There is no marijuana in this car, and you know it. What is the real reason for this stop?" Her calm, direct challenge seemed to enrage him. His eyes narrowed. "So, we've got a mouthy one. Ma'am, I'm talking to the driver. Now, I'm going to ask you to step out of the vehicle as well." "For what cause?" Eva pressed, knowing her rights. That was the spark that lit the fuse. "Failure to comply." Maddox roared, yanking David's door open. "Out of the car, now." He pulled David out roughly. "You, too," he shouted at Eva, his face now flush with anger. Eva opened her door slowly, her movements deliberate to accommodate her pregnancy. She stood, placing a hand on her belly. "Officer, you are acting far outside your authority." "I am the authority," he screamed, his spittle flying. And then the unthinkable happened. As Eva stood her ground, her expression a mask of disbelief at his unprofessionalism, he took a step forward. He saw her pregnant belly not as a sign of vulnerability to be protected, but as a target to exert dominance over. He lifted his booted foot and delivered a short, sharp, brutal kick directly to her abdomen. The world dissolved into a kaleidoscope of pain and shock. The impact stole her breath, a blinding agony radiating through her. She collapsed to the pavement, curling into a ball, her entire being focused on the precious life inside her. Through a haze of tears, she heard David screaming her name, the sound of a scuffle, and then the terrified gasps of other drivers who had stopped to watch the horror unfold. In that moment, lying on the hot asphalt, the retired intelligence officer, the hardened Marine, was gone. All that was left was a mother, terrified for her child. But deep within the pain, a cold, familiar part of her mind was already working. It was taking notes. It was logging the threat. And it was planning a response. The hospital room was a sterile white box, the only sound the steady, reassuring rhythm of the fetal heart monitor. The doctor had been cautiously optimistic. "The baby is resilient," she'd said. The amniotic fluid provided a significant cushion. "There's no sign of immediate distress, but we need to keep you for observation. Any trauma during pregnancy is serious." David sat by her bedside, holding her hand, his face a wreck of tear-streaked fury and helpless terror. "I'm going to sue him, Ev," he seethed, his voice trembling. "I'll get the best lawyer in the state. We'll take his badge, his pension, everything." Eva, however, was unnervingly calm. Her breathing was controlled, her gaze distant and analytical. The initial wave of maternal terror had subsided, replaced by a chillingly familiar mindset. She wasn't a victim anymore. She was an intelligence officer conducting an after-action review. "David," she said, her voice quiet but firm, "I need you to stop thinking like a husband and start thinking like a witness. What did you see?" "Exactly." "What?" "I saw him kick you." "I know what he did." "I need to know what you saw." "His posture. His expression before the kick. Where was his partner? Were other people recording? What were their angles?" David stared at her, bewildered by her clinical detachment. I don't know. I was just looking at you." Eva closed her eyes, a flicker of frustration crossing her face. Emotional responses were a liability in the field. "It's okay," she said softly. "We have the videos. The bystanders." Her mind was already cataloging assets and liabilities, mapping out a campaign. A lawsuit was one tool, yes, but it was a blunt instrument, slow and subject to the whims of a system she knew was often rigged. What she had in mind was more precise. It was surgical. As David went to get her some water, Eva stared at the ceiling, and the sterile white tiles dissolved into the cracked mud walls of a small building in Kandahar province, Afghanistan, 8 years earlier. She was a young captain then, tasked with interrogating a mid-level Taliban bombmaker they had captured. He was arrogant, defiant, spitting insults at her, at America, at her gender. The soldiers wanted to beat the information out of him. Eva had stopped them. She had sat with the man for 3 days. She didn't threaten him. She didn't touch him. She just talked to him. She learned the name of his village, the number of his children, the brand of tea he preferred. She learned from an informant that he was deeply in debt to a rival commander. She didn't use this information to blackmail him. Instead, on the 3rd day, she arranged for a small, anonymous payment to be made to his wife back in the village, enough to settle his debt. Then she went back into the room and simply said, "Your family is safe. Your honor is restored. Now, tell me about the IEDs." The man, his entire worldview shattered by an act of incomprehensible, strategic kindness from his enemy, broke down and told her everything. She hadn't defeated the man, she had dismantled his reality. He was no longer a holy warrior. He was just a man who had been shown a different way out. That was her method. Not brute force. Psychological leverage. A nurse entered the room, interrupting her reverie. "Mrs. Rostova? Your husband asked me to check on you." Eva focused her eyes, the memory of the desert heat fading. "I'm fine," she said. "Actually, could you do me a favor? Could you get me the full name and badge number of the officer who brought me in? I need it for the insurance report." The nurse, happy to help the polite, calm pregnant woman, nodded and left. When David returned, Eva's demeanor had changed. The analytical calm was still there, but now it was charged with a terrifying purpose. "A lawsuit is phase 3, David," she said, her voice low. "It's the public face of the operation. But phase 1 and 2 have to happen first." "Operation? Ev, what are you talking about?" She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw the Marine captain he had only heard stories about. Her eyes were like chips of ice. "I'm talking about a full-spectrum intelligence operation targeting Officer Travis Maddox. We're not going to get him fired, David. We're not going to sue him for money. We are going to dismantle his entire world. We are going to find out what he loves, what he fears, and what he's hiding. And we are going to use it to burn his career and his reputation to the ground. He kicked me. He declared war on our family. He has no idea what kind of war he just started." Phase 1 began from her hospital bed. While the world raged on social media and civil rights leaders gave impassioned speeches, Eva Rostova, former Marine intelligence officer, went to work. Her primary weapon was her smartphone. Her first calls were not to lawyers, but to a handful of contacts from her past, their numbers stored not by name, but by code. Her first call was to a man known only as Echo. He was a retired signals intelligence NCO, a savant who could navigate the labyrinth of the digital world like a fish navigates water. He now ran a high-end cybersecurity firm. "Eva," his voice crackled through the phone, full of warmth and surprise. "I heard you retired to raise a future Marine. Don't tell me you're bored already." "Not bored, Echo. Targeted," she replied, her voice flat. "I need a full digital workup. Legally. Everything open source or accessible through public record requests. Officer Travis Maddox, Suburban Georgia PD. I want his digital ghost. Social media history, public records, property deeds, court filings, business licenses, everything. Consider it a professional courtesy, Captain. Give me 48 hours." Her next call was to Spectre, a woman who had worked under her at the Defense Intelligence Agency. Spectre now had a comfortable, high-level job within the Department of Justice. "Captain," Spectre's voice was crisp and professional. "This line is secure. What do you need?" "Spectre, I need a favor. I need the official service and complaint history of a local officer. Nothing classified. Just what should be publicly available but is often buried. His name is Travis Maddox. I've seen your video, Eva. It's making waves here. I'm not surprised you're calling. I'll see what I can pull from the national database without raising any flags. You'll have it by morning." For 2 days, Eva directed her small, unofficial intelligence cell from her bed. David watched in awe as she transformed. She was a CEO directing a corporate takeover, a general marshalling her forces. She cross-referenced information, built timelines, and created a complex digital dossier on her laptop, protected by layers of military-grade encryption. The information that flowed back was a portrait of a petty tyrant. Echo's report arrived first. It was a 50-page PDF detailing Maddox's life. He was drowning in debt, with 2 mortgages and a car lease he couldn't afford. His digital footprint was a cesspool of thinly veiled racism. He was a member of multiple Blue Lives Matter Facebook groups that were notorious for extremist rhetoric. He had liked tweets that mocked Black Lives Matter protesters, and his algorithmic ally suggested friends were a who's who of local far-right agitators. There were online gambling receipts and a string of angry comments on a local news site complaining about taxes and affirmative action. He was a cliché of resentful, white male grievance. Spectre's report was even more damning. It was Maddox's official complaint history, a litany of misconduct that had been systematically buried by his department. For excessive force complaints in 5 years, all of them against black men. All of them were dismissed with a finding of unsubstantiated or within department policy. There was a domestic disturbance call to his own home 2 years prior, where his ex-wife claimed he had threatened her. The report was quietly closed when she declined to press charges. Eva read through the files, her expression grim. Maddox wasn't just a racist cop who had a bad day. He was a predator who had been enabled by a system designed to protect him. A lawsuit would be mired in the courts for years, and he would be defended by that very system. It wasn't enough. She needed a different kind of leverage. She found it deep within Echo's financial analysis. A recurring monthly payment to a local towing company, Gators Towing and Recovery. It was listed as a consulting fee, which made no sense for a police officer. Eva did a quick search. The owner of Gators Towing had a criminal record for insurance fraud and was a known associate of a local organized crime figure. The towing company, she discovered, had an exclusive and highly lucrative contract with the police department to handle all impounds from traffic stops and accidents, a contract that was renewed every year without a public bid. Eva's mind made the connection instantly. Maddox wasn't just a racist. He was corrupt. He was likely getting kickbacks from the towing company in exchange for ensuring they got the city's business, or for looking the other way on their more illicit activities. This was it. This was the vulnerability. Accusations of racism could be debated and spun by right-wing media. Accusations of public corruption, with bank statements to back them up, were a different matter. They were a cancer that even the most loyal police union would have trouble defending. She highlighted the bank transfers on her screen. Target acquired, she whispered to herself. Operation Bullseye was about to move from intelligence gathering to direct action. A successful psychological operation, Eva knew, was like a virus. It had to be introduced into the host system quietly, appearing to be a natural phenomenon, before it multiplied and overwhelmed the target's defenses. She would not attack Maddox directly. She would make his own corrupt world turn against him. Her first move was to craft 2 separate, anonymous information packages. She didn't use a personal computer, instead opting for a public library terminal 2 towns over, routing her connection through multiple overseas servers, a basic tradecraft she could do in her sleep. The first package was for the media. She sent it to a single, carefully chosen investigative journalist at the state's largest newspaper, a woman known for her tenacity in digging into public corruption. The email was brief and untraceable. Subject: Tip on police corruption. Body: Look into the relationship between Officer Travis Maddox and Gators Towing and Recovery. Follow the money. Attached was a single, redacted bank statement showing one of the consulting fee payments, just enough to whet the journalist's appetite without revealing the full scope of Eva's knowledge. The second package was for the police department's internal affairs division. It was slightly different. It contained not just the financial information, but also 2 of the previously buried excessive force complaints, presented side by side. The email to the IA's anonymous tip line was worded differently. Subject: Officer Maddox is a liability. It appears Officer Maddox has an undeclared financial relationship with a city contractor. This, combined with his extensive and costly complaint history, presents a significant legal and financial risk to the department and the city. You might want to look into this before a plaintiff's lawyer does. The language was perfect. It wasn't the plea of a victim, it was the cold, calculated warning of a risk manager. It appealed not to their sense of justice, but to their instinct for self-preservation. Within a week, the virus began to work. The investigative journalist, smelling a major story, started filing public records requests and making quiet inquiries. Simultaneously, the internal affairs complaint, because it mentioned specific financial misconduct, could not be easily buried. An official, albeit low-level, inquiry was opened into Maddox. The effect on Maddox was immediate and profound. He was called into a meeting with his lieutenant and an IA officer. The questions were vague but pointed. "Travis, we had a tip about your off-duty work. Anything you want to tell us?" Maddox, a man accustomed to wielding power, was suddenly on the defensive. He became paranoid. He saw suspicion in every glance from a fellow officer. Was someone out to get him? Who had talked? His aggressive bluster began to crack, revealing the insecure bully beneath. His work grew sloppy. He was short-tempered during traffic stops, his reports were full of errors. He started drinking more heavily after his shifts. Eva monitored his decline from a distance, using Echo to track his digital chatter. She saw him posting paranoid rants in his private Facebook groups, blaming a liberal conspiracy for the investigation. He was unraveling, just as she had predicted. A man like Maddox, whose identity was built on a fragile foundation of authority and dominance, couldn't handle being the target. Then, the journalist's story broke. The headline was devastating: Westfield officer under investigation for corruption, ties to embattled towing company. The article detailed the suspicious payments and hinted at Maddox's troubling history of excessive force complaints. The public reaction was immediate. The viral video of Eva's assault was now recontextualized. Maddox wasn't just a racist cop who lost his temper, he was a corrupt official with a pattern of abuse. The narrative was no longer just about one horrific kick, it was about a systemic rot he represented. His fellow officers, who might have privately defended his actions in the assault case, now distanced themselves from him. No one wanted to be associated with a dirty cop. He was isolated, toxic. Sitting in her quiet home, Eva read the article on her tablet, a small, grim smile touching her lips. She had not laid a hand on him. She had not even spoken his name in public. She had simply supplied the truth to the right people at the right time and allowed his own corrupt system to begin eating him alive. The psychological operation was a success. Now, it was time for the final checkmate. The pressure on Officer Travis Maddox became unbearable. The internal investigation was closing in, the media was relentless, and his own department was treating him like a pariah. In a desperate act of self-preservation, he made the one move Eva had anticipated in her strategic forecast: he sought help from his protector. His protector was Deputy Chief of Police, Frank Miller, a man who had mentored Maddox for years and had personally quashed 2 of his prior excessive force complaints. Maddox called Miller, his voice a frantic whisper. "Frank, they've got the bank records. They're talking to the tow truck guy. We need to get our story straight." Miller, a man who had survived 30 years on the force by knowing when to cut his losses, agreed to a clandestine meeting. They met late at night in a deserted industrial park on the edge of town. Maddox, his face pale and sweaty under the flickering sodium lights, laid out his panic. Miller listened, his expression grim. What they didn't know was that their meeting was being observed. Not by a person, but by a signal. Eva's hacker friend, Echo, acting on her prediction, had set up a legal, digital tripwire. He had written a simple script to monitor cell tower data for a specific proximity alert, when Maddox's phone and Miller's phone came within 100 feet of each other outside of normal working hours. The moment they met in the park, Echo received an alert. He couldn't hear their conversation, but he now had a timestamp and a GPS coordinate proving a secret, off-the-books meeting between the subject of an internal investigation and the high-ranking officer who was supposed to be impartially overseeing it. But Eva had one more card to play. The day before, she had sent a second anonymous tip, this time to the FBI's public corruption hotline. The tip was simple, based on the intel she had gathered about Miller's own vulnerabilities. It suggested that Deputy Chief Miller might be tampering with evidence in the Maddox investigation to protect himself, and that he was scheduled to meet with Maddox to coordinate their stories. It was a calculated guess, an educated hypothesis based on her profile of the 2 men. The FBI, already aware of the high-profile case, took the tip seriously. They didn't have enough to get a warrant to bug the meeting, but they had enough to authorize surveillance. An unmarked FBI van was parked half a mile away, a powerful directional microphone aimed at the 2 figures in the desolate park. The audio it captured was a goldmine. Miller wasn't there to help Maddox. He was there to threaten him. "You need to keep your mouth shut, Travis." Miller's voice was a low growl on the recording. "You take the fall for the towing contract. You say it was a personal loan. If you try to drag me into this, I will bury you. I'll leak your psych eval. I'll make sure you never work in law enforcement again." Maddox, realizing he was being cut loose, panicked. "But you told me to set up the deal. You got the bigger cut." It was the confession the FBI needed. It was conspiracy, obstruction of justice, and a clear admission of the corruption Eva had suspected. The next morning, Eva sat at her kitchen table, sipping chamomile tea. Her husband, David, sat across from her, watching the local news on a tablet. The top story wasn't about her anymore. It was about a pre-dawn raid. The screen showed dramatic footage of FBI agents, clad in tactical gear, swarming the Westfield Police Department. They were carrying boxes of files, computer hard drives. The headline read, "FBI raids Westfield PD in sweeping corruption probe, Deputy Chief and Senior Officer arrested." The report detailed the arrests of Deputy Chief Frank Miller and Officer Travis Maddox on charges of racketeering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. The story of Maddox's financial ties to the towing company was laid bare, and his history of buried excessive force complaints was presented as part of a pattern of institutional corruption overseen by Miller. The kick, the act of racist brutality that had started it all, was now presented as the arrogant act of a man who believed he was above the law because, for years, his superiors had ensured that he was. David looked up from the tablet, his eyes wide with disbelief and awe. He looked at his wife, who was calmly watching the news, one hand resting on her pregnant belly. She had done it. She had never held a press conference, never filed a lawsuit, never even raised her voice. She had simply identified the enemy's critical weakness and applied precise, overwhelming force at exactly the right point. It was a perfect intelligence operation. Eva met his gaze and gave a small, serene smile. "Checkmate," she said softly. 3 months later, the world felt different. The city of Westfield was still reeling from the corruption scandal that had decapitated its police department. Deputy Chief Miller and Officer Maddox had both taken plea deals, their careers ending not with a bang, but with the quiet shame of a prison sentence. A federally overseen task force was now rebuilding the department from the ground up, implementing new policies on use of force, transparency, and anti-corruption. The story of Eva's assault had become a catalyst for a change she never intended. In the quiet, sun-drenched nursery, Eva Rostova sat in a rocking chair, her world now focused on a much smaller, more precious reality. She held her newborn son, Leo, in her arms, his tiny fingers wrapped around one of her own. He was healthy, perfect, a testament to resilience. David knelt beside them, his face a portrait of pure joy. The storm had passed. On a small television in the corner of the room, a national news program was doing a follow-up story on the Westfield scandal. A legal analyst was speaking. "What's remarkable about this case," the analyst said, "is that the change wasn't driven by protests or lawsuits, but by a quiet, methodical exposure of the truth. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the most effective way to fight a corrupt system is to simply let its own darkness be exposed to the light." Eva looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. Her time as a Marine was over. Her war against Travis Maddox was over. But as she felt the warmth of her son against her chest, she knew a new mission had just begun. It was a lifelong deployment, a mission of love, protection, and raising a good man in a world that was still flawed, but one she had helped make a little bit better. She had fought for this peace, and she would guard it with her life. Her revenge wasn't just in the downfall of her attacker, it was in the quiet joy of this very moment, in the defiant, beautiful act of bringing new life and new hope into the world. That was a victory no one could ever take away. This story is a tribute to the silent strength and strategic minds that refuse to be victims. If you were inspired by Eva's courage and intelligence, like this video and subscribe for more stories of justice. And in the comments, Tell us what you think the most powerful form of revenge is.